Russia launched as many as 2 Oreshniks at Ukraine, but one fell on its own side. Power outages in Belgorod. What happened? Ukrainian drones have become even more dangerous. The consequences for Russia will be obvious.
Now electronic warfare will no longer affect anything because everything will switch to flights without GPS at all, and electronic warfare will have no impact on deep strikes.
A coup in Serbia, large-scale protests, and the president's resignation.
Due to the fact that the end of my term is approaching, I may, in the near future, have to resign from my position, Vučić said.
A slap in the face for Lukashenko? The leader of the Belarusian opposition has arrived in Ukraine for the first time, shooting near the White House, another assassination attempt on the United States president. Trump was trampled underfoot. Venezuela has gone against the states.
Maduro's supporters burned portraits of Trump and Marco Rubio right in the square.
Hello, I'm Volodymyr Rabchun. This is Ukraine Today. Please subscribe, like, and let's move on to the news. The largest Russian attack on Kyiv since the start of the full-scale invasion. 2 dead, 91 wounded. The occupiers hit residential buildings, schools, and medical facilities. In addition, buildings of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Chernobyl Museum, the Art Museum, the International Center for Culture and Arts, the Cabinet of Ministers, and dozens of other structures were damaged. 2 people were killed and 8 more were injured due to enemy strikes on the Kyiv region. Warehouse premises caught fire there. Rescuers extinguished the fire. Robots and aviation were involved in the firefighting. The consequences could have been much worse if not for the work of the air defense. Ukrainian defenders have reached a 97% interception rate for Russian Shaheds. This was stated by the advisor to the President of Ukraine on defense industry issues, Oleksandr Kamyshin. The fact that Russia is throwing money down the drain with its drones, ineffective drones, yes, this is already being talked about even in the so-called Z community. Here are the details.
Ukraine has learned to shoot down 97% of Shaheds. Analysts from the Wall Street Journal came up with these calculations. In the publication, Ukrainian air defense is directly called one of the most effective in the world. Over the past week, on average, out of more than 100 enemy UAVs daily, no more than a dozen reached their target. The real test of strength was the night of May 24th, when Russia simultaneously launched 90 missiles and 600 drones. Against the background of the colossal workload of the air defense, 549 drones were shot down.
This part is indeed very significant, but it's clear that it's not possible to shoot down everything at some line where we can meet them with a wall of layered air defense, because there are still not enough resources. The figure today is impressive, 690 air attack assets, but they can't all operate at once. Either it's a Western fighter operating or a Soviet one, or it's ground-based systems. That's why shooting down so many targets with different speeds and different flight paths, all flying to one place at once, is extremely difficult to do.
Flight path.
Meanwhile, the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense is predicting an early end for the Shaheds. The thing is, those units that reach targets in Ukraine, often civilian ones, still don't cause the damage hoped for by those across the border.
Even an enemy who doesn't count money understands that launching $70 million worth of Shaheds at once, with a dubious result of about 5%, is a pipe dream.
But the Russians haven't even dreamed of such statistics for destroying UAVs. Ukrainian drones are repeatedly breaking through Putin's air defenses. And as it turned out, they can even handle the 3 tiers of Moscow's air defense system. So the strike in Taman, which followed the attack on Kyiv, didn't really surprise anyone anymore.
Crushing blows fell on the relevant terminal, the piers, and the infrastructure serving oil exports. This was stated in the report from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. It explains that the loading arms were directly destroyed. These are the pipes that pump oil onto the corresponding tanker. In other words, it's a strike on a key logistical hub within Russia's oil export operations.
Speaking of Ukraine's capabilities, our military has repeatedly stated they are ready to share them with partners. Naturally, on mutually beneficial terms. After all, there really is no air defense of this level anywhere else in the world.
Today, Ukraine has unique experience in protecting the airspace of a country with a large territory and guarding critical infrastructure. We are not talking about some separate systems that can be produced somewhere or purchased under a contract. We are talking about a unique system that combines many different aspects. Without creating such a system, it's simply naive today to say that any country or its assets are protected from modern threats from the air. It's impossible. It is necessary to create a unique air defense system. Ukraine already has such experience.
The West also recognizes the leadership of Ukrainian air defense, especially when it comes to fighting drones. $1 million contracts, including with Middle Eastern countries, are further proof of this.
I think that Ukraine can absolutely, fully and completely be a truly serious and significant exporter of security. This can include the direct export of drones and also the sharing of some information, though only partial information, since we must always keep the golden share for ourselves. It can also mean direct joint assemblies and, of course, the training and education of specialists. So it's really a complete and thorough security export package for the specific locations where it's genuinely needed today, for those countries that are interested.
But Ukraine doesn't plan to stop at interceptor drones or, say, a specific model of air defense operations. Hundreds of new startups are already on the way. Dozens of them will be brought to life. And all this with one goal: to be a step or even several steps ahead of the enemy.
The Russians hit Bila Tserkva with an Oreshnik. So-called Z channels report that the missile hit an FPV drone production plant. However, the invaders hit a garage cooperative with no casualties. It's known that the Oreshnik was launched from the Kapustin Yar testing ground. We're talking about an intermediate-range ballistic missile. Specialists are already examining everything that's left of it. Ukraine has initiated an emergency meeting of the UN, OSCE, the Council of Europe, and UNESCO. Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha stated that the Ukrainian side has instructed diplomatic missions to maximize the use of international tools in response to the massive Russian shelling. Meanwhile, the SBU hit a pumping station in Torkovo in Russia's Vladimir region. It supplies fuel to oil depots around Moscow and the capital's airports, Sheremetyevo, Domodedovo, and Vnukovo. A large-scale fire broke out at the facility. Temporarily occupied Crimea is also on the verge of a fuel catastrophe. The Russians are unable to control either the land routes to the peninsula or the sea routes.
Ukraine has severed the land corridor to Crimea.
Damn, huh? Oh, come on now, step on it, will you? Seriously, hurry up. Step on it, step on it, step on it. It's blown up. Huh? Stop for me. Stop, yeah. Come on, get out. Come on, get out, come on. Several cars, damn. Holy cow.
60,000 Russian soldiers have been left without fuel and supplies. An ammunition storage warehouse in Mezhgorye was hit. In Zhankoy, a train with fuel and military equipment was on fire. Also, the Donetsk-Mariupol highway to Crimea, one of the key rear logistics lines, has become a road of death for the occupiers. Fuel tankers and army trucks are regularly under attack. The Chonhar checkpoint is now also under the control of our military. The video shows how skillfully fuel tankers traveling from Russia to Crimea along the Melitopol-Zhankoy highway were hit. The Gauleiter of the occupied part of the Kherson region, Saldo, has banned movement through the Chonhar checkpoint. The ban on civilian movement is effectively an admission by the collaborators that the armed forces of Ukraine control the land corridor with fire. The fact that permits are only for military transport and essential goods really highlights the scale of the problem.
And it also means that the southern grouping of the Russian Federation and the occupation forces in Crimea are being actively cut off from supplies. Believe me, right now some of those nasty collaborators are already moving their families out of Crimea. They understand where this is all heading.
Previously, Russian military convoys hid among civilian trucks, using them as a human shield. Now everything has changed. The empty M14 highway means that any large truck is automatically a military target.
Again, considering the capabilities of our drones, considering the capabilities of our, including, let's say, our naval components, so we fully understand that there will be naval support as well. Our drones can operate, including against that same port of Berdyansk, no matter how well it's guarded. So at the very least, from several sides today, such strikes will be carried out. This will also be connected in any case with this land road, with this corridor, and with our ports which are temporarily occupied, with this logistics. It's all obvious.
Putin and the Kremlin claim that Ukraine's attacks on oil refineries have not affected the situation in any way. The Ministry of Energy of the Russian Federation stated that the situation on the domestic motor fuel market in Russia remains stable and controlled, and no disruptions in regional supply have been recorded.
In connection with this, what do I want to say? Well, of course, we obviously offer our apologies, although these are objective reasons. Nevertheless, so that we can be honest and open with you in this situation, I want to say the tension will persist for some time yet.
But why then did the Russian Federation start restricting the sale of gasoline at gas stations? Just like last year, the fuel crisis began in annexed Crimea. 100-octane gasoline has crossed the 100 mark and now costs 107 rubles. In Sevastopol, gasoline was limited to 20 liters per car, and in some places, diesel started being issued by coupons. Long lines are already forming at gas stations as residents fear further shortages.
What is this? This is the lack of fuel in Crimea. And gas at 43.20. Diesel at 81 rubles. Man, when, where, why are we rolling downhill? I don't understand. There were those statements by interesting individuals such as Solovyov, where he said that yes, bloggers should be imprisoned, that basically everyone who films should be imprisoned. We really have nothing left. I support those who film such videos and say that, man, we have a problem because we have nothing left but to speak, shout, and show from every corner of Russia what is happening with our prices.
The Russian appointed head of the city, Razvozhayev, stated that there are logistical difficulties, and he asked local residents to treat the situation with understanding and not to create an artificial panic.
Today, a measure is being introduced that has already proven its effectiveness. And in order to avoid an artificial panic, the release and sale of fuel at the TS gas station network will be limited to no more than 20 liters per car or per canister. That is, a driver who arrives by car at a TES filling station can purchase 20 liters of fuel, either for the car or in a canister. A person who arrives with a canister at a TS gas station can also purchase 20 liters.
Sevastopol became the first region whose authorities introduced restrictions on the sale of fuel due to Ukrainian strikes on oil refineries. Before that, people in Ryazan began to complain about the lack of AI-92 and AI-95 gasoline at gas stations. Does anyone know where you can fill up with 95 gasoline today? We went to Spetsneft on Kudryavtseva. There's none at all except for 100. The attendant said there's a moratorium starting today. Full tank on Sportivnaya. There's just no 95. Where to go? Is there any info? No longer a gas station country. As a result of Ukrainian attacks over the past 2 weeks, all major oil refineries in central Russia have significantly reduced raw material processing or completely stopped operations. Plants in Ryazan, Moscow, Nizhny Novgorod, Yaroslavl, and Kirishi were hit. Putin's press secretary Peskov stated that the Kremlin sees no risks in supplying Russia with fuel after the drone attacks. The Kremlin representative admitted that in some areas of the country, fuel production may be reduced, but linked the reduction to seasonal maintenance work. According to Peskov, the fuel balance has the necessary compensation system, and the Ministry of Energy is monitoring the fuel situation. Crimea risks running into a total shortage of everything. They are not allowed onto the ferry crossing, and our drones are on duty from the side of Putin's land corridor. Meanwhile, after the Ukrainian strikes on oil refineries, gasoline problems are spreading across all occupied territories. After Crimea, restrictions on the sale of fuel were also introduced in the occupied part of the Zaporizhzhia region. Gauleiter Yevgeny Belitsky announced temporary difficulties with the delivery of gasoline to gas stations, which is why fuel began to be released with limits per person. The land corridor was important to Putin after he realized that the Crimean bridge could be destroyed by Ukraine at any moment. But here too he miscalculated. The armed forces of Ukraine are confidently moving forward, destroying Putin's plans and cutting off and destroying the enemy's logistics.
Over the past 24 hours, the Russian army has lost at least 1,020 invaders killed and wounded. Thus, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, this is already 1,356,940 occupiers. In addition, over the last 24 hours, Ukraine's defense forces have destroyed 3 Russian tanks, 5 armored fighting vehicles, 47 artillery systems, and dozens more units of other Russian military equipment. Now is the perfect time to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like and share it. Please do it right now. Thank you and glory to Ukraine. Residents of Russia no longer trust Putin. This is evidenced by fresh survey data conducted by the company USP. Faith in the correct course of the RF has collapsed to a critical 10.5%. 33.8% of respondents, that's just a third, fully or partially approve of Putin's activities as president of the RF. At the same time, 84% of those surveyed believe that Putin is specifically to blame for the large-scale disasters and fires of 2026, like in Tuapse, for example. Almost 74% of the study participants stated that living in the RF has become dangerous. The leader of the Belarusian opposition, Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, has arrived in Kyiv for the first time. Her meeting is planned with the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha, the leadership of the Verkhovna Rada, as well as EU diplomats. The visit takes place against the backdrop of strengthening the defense of the Ukrainian border due to the growing threat of an attack from Belarus. The enemy's plans in northern Ukraine have been revealed, from creating a 20-kilometer buffer zone in the Chernihiv region to a repeated assault on Kyiv. Lukashenko is urgently putting the country's rapid response forces on a martial law footing, while the Kremlin is preparing another 100,000 mobilized troops. All the details are in the report.
Russia is considering several scenarios for actions in northern Ukraine, from creating a buffer zone in the Chernihiv region to an attempt to head toward Kyiv again. According to RBC Ukraine, the most realistic option if Russia does go on the offensive is an attempt to create a buffer zone in the Chernihiv region with a depth of up to 10 to 20 kilometers. The least realistic scenario is a new offensive on Kyiv. For a possible operation in the north, the Kremlin may be preparing an additional mobilization of another 100,000 troops.
According to one of RBC Ukraine's sources, they will be able to start an offensive according to one of the courses of action chosen by the Russians no earlier than autumn.
President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that the Russian dictator Putin wants to convince the self-proclaimed president of Belarus, Lukashenko, to join new Russian aggressive operations.
Is there a threat from Belarus to Ukraine? There probably is. Especially since this is being discussed more and more seriously at the highest level, including with the president of Ukraine. At the same time, it must be understood that Lukashenko is unlikely to be very eager to enter this military conflict, as he probably understands perfectly well what potential threats this creates for him.
Indeed, Batka Lukashenko stated the day before that Minsk does not intend to get dragged into the war in Ukraine. He clarified that this is only possible in one case, if Ukraine commits an act of aggression against them.
You've noticed I don't react at all to that chatter coming from Kyiv, including from President Zelensky. We are not going to get involved in the war in Ukraine. As for his statements that Belarus will be dragged into the war, I just said it will be dragged in only in one case, if an act of aggression is committed against our territory. And here it's not just being dragged in, but we, as you heard from the President of Russia, we will together defend our fatherland, where two states are located, from Brest to Vladivostok.
General or open mobilization in Belarus has not been announced at the moment. However, targeted training activities are being carried out. Planned drafts and military training for reservists are regularly carried out in the country. In addition, on May 21st, Putin and Lukashenko held the second stage of joint nuclear force exercises. This shows Russia's increasing control over Belarus. Russia has more opportunities to use the territory of Belarus for its military operations. Although getting involved in the war against Ukraine is not profitable for Lukashenko.
Lukashenko's life seemed to just be getting back on track. The United States is lifting sanctions, so everything should be fine, and now getting into some war, well, probably the last thing he needs, but at the same time he is obviously forced to somehow respond to constant pressure from Putin, which is obviously only increasing. That is, Putin obviously needs a victory in Donbass as soon as possible. For this, it is necessary to stretch the Ukrainian troops. For this, it is necessary to create a threat against Kyiv and Chernihiv. Therefore, the pressure on Lukashenko in this regard is probably very, very serious.
One thing is clear, Lukashenko, as usual and already traditionally, will maneuver.
Apparently, he is now forced to maneuver, on the one hand, constantly portraying a readiness to support Putin in words, constantly stating that he is ready, he will literally always help, support, do everything. Well, in reality, probably the last thing Lukashenko wants is to actually get into this war. Therefore, I think that the statement from the Ukrainian authorities is primarily a warning for Lukashenko that no matter how Putin threatens him, if he gets into this war directly, the consequences for him will be worse than everything Putin promised him.
In addition, experts are sure the Belarusian army has neither the experience nor as much strength and capability as the Ukrainian one.
It is completely unclear how the Belarusian army will behave against the Ukrainian army, which has experience of quite a serious confrontation with a much more serious and dangerous enemy. Besides, Ukraine has recently significantly strengthened its capabilities in terms of long-range strikes, in terms of drones. Ukraine is successfully striking oil refineries deep within Russian territory, meaning the SBU sanctions are reaching Perm, Tuapse, the Urals, and the Leningrad region.
Currently, per RBC, activity in the Chernihiv-Kyiv direction and the threat level are low, but the military political leadership is tracking several factors, events and signs that could point to Russian preparations for potential offensive operations in the north. First and foremost, it's the number of troops near our northern borders. On the Belarusian side, as before, 4 battalions of the Belarusian army are stationed. That's about 1,900 troops who are constantly being rotated. There is also no sufficient number of Russian troops to conduct offensive operations from either Belarus or the Bryansk region. Be that as it may, Ukraine is not letting its guard down. According to President Zelensky, all components of the defense forces are working to strengthen defenses in the Chernihiv-Kyiv direction, and relevant data will be shared with partners and signals sent to Belarus through diplomatic channels.
In all these areas, we will ensure that the population has confidence that Ukraine is protected. The armed forces are in place, the necessary weapons are there, and the appropriate personnel are on site in the required numbers. And even if the enemy considers potential moves, they will see what forces are here. I think the desire will fade away.
The self-proclaimed president of Belarus, Lukashenko, and French leader Macron held a phone conversation. This happened for the first time since 2022. According to Minsk, the parties discussed regional issues and Belarus's relations with the European Union. And the French TV channel TF1 reports that Macron warned Lukashenko against participating in the war against Ukraine. The conversation touched upon the risks and potential consequences for Belarus. Finally, on the strength of the Ukrainian spirit, heavyweight world champion Alexander Usyk defeated Dutch boxer and kickboxer Rico Verhoeven by knockout. The fight took place on the night of a massive Russian shelling, so Ukrainians watched the events in the ring tensely from shelters. At one point, it felt like the Dutchman had seized the initiative. However, in the 11th round, Usyk first knocked his opponent down, and then the referee stopped the fight because Verhoeven had completely lost control of the situation. It is known that Rico filed an official protest regarding the outcome of the fight. In Usyk's opinion, this is an unnecessary step, as continuing the fight could have had catastrophic consequences for Verhoeven's health. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. Strength to the Ukrainian defenders, men and women. Glory to Ukraine. Subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share this video. And see you soon.